Hello and welcome to ROPESCAST, the independent voice of the Middle East. I'm Ibrahim Abu Ahmed. ROPES stands for the Regional Organization for Peace, Economics and Security. We lay the groundwork for a post-conflict Middle East by connecting forward-thinking Israeli and Palestinian emerging leaders with like-minded peers from across the region. If you're looking for more information on ROPES, please visit our website, ropes.org. Our special guest today is Sarit Zehavi, the founder and president of the Alma Research and Education Center, a nonprofit and an independent research and education center specialized in Israel's security challenges on and the northern borders. Sarit scripts numerous position papers and updates focusing on Lebanon, Syria, and Israel's national security challenges. She served for 15 years in the Israeli Defense Forces, specializing in military intelligence. Her unique achievements led her to be selected by the Jerusalem Post as one of the top 50 most influential global Jewish personalities of 2021. Hi, Sarit, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
How are you today? How are you feeling? How is the situation up north?
It's not the best timing we had. Situation here is very difficult. It's kind of a low-scale war, I can say, and we don't see the end. I'm worried on a professional level and mostly on a personal level. But I'm very happy to be with you today and to talk about all these things.
7 years ago, you met when it was just an idea at that time that you wanted to create a research center in the north of Israel to talk about and research the security challenges that exist across Israel's northern borders with Lebanon and Syria. Back in the time, the war in Syria was still ongoing. And the idea back then, and I remember you wanted to focus on Israel's northern borders as a statement. And it was like a two-folded statement, right? One is you're from the north. You want to research about the area that you come from and emphasize its importance, especially with the fact that the focus of Israel's security is always about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And the second fold of that statement is that the real, I would say, existential threat lies in the north. Are we there today?
Moreover, I think that what happened in the past 7 years is a process that Iran invested a lot of efforts and succeeded to mobilize militias and terrorist organizations such as the Houthis of Yemen, such as Hamas in Gaza, which back then we didn't even imagine that we'll have that much of collaboration with Iranians. And eventually what we are facing now, the campaign that we are facing now in Israel, I still very much insist that it has nothing to do with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, actually. And it is not Israel-Hamas war. It is something else. And we cannot solve it by the tools that we got used to talk about when we talked about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, because it's not about that. I think that Iran couldn't care less about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and it is using this conflict to gain its own goals and to promote its own agenda in this region, while the destruction of Israel is only part of this agenda. It's not everything. And what we saw in the past decade, and especially in the past 7 years, is that Iran kind of hugged Hamas and succeeded, as I said, to mobilize it, to become, I don't want to say a proxy, but kind of a freelance, that it could be a player in this Shiite axis of evil, even though Hamas is not Shiite, and even though I cannot say that all the Shiites are part of this axis. But what we see today is that this octopus of the radical ideology of the Ayatollahs of Iran, and I definitely don't speak of the Iranian people because I truly don't know where they are standing around that. The head of the octopus succeeded in creating many arms that each of them has its own agenda, different capabilities, but they all get the supporting, the munition, and a little bit of the ideology. And that's why it is a campaign that was planned for a long time. I wanted to talk about the North. I didn't anticipate that Iran will succeed in creating that much of a threat to Israel, also from the South and also from the Red Sea with the Houthis. And I think Israelis in general had the tendency to underestimate the military capabilities of Hamas. That's part of the failure.
Now that you mentioned the North, you know, and the world's eyes are kind of on the North right now, I feel, you know, worrying whether or not we are on the verge of a war. But before we talk about that question, can you walk our audience a little bit through what happened on October the 7th in the North? And what's been happening since? What are the developments that we're seeing on Israel's northern border? Since all the focus is on what's happening in Gaza, of course, but what's happening in the north? What has been happening to reach the point where today we're asking, are we going to an all-out war?
I want to start from geography. The north is different from the south with regard to geography. The south is a desert. It's flat. The communities based in the south, most of them, those who were attacked, most of them are not meters away from the fence. There are a few hundreds of meters from the fence. In the north, the situation is different. There are many communities, like what you see now behind me in the videos, which are a video of Hezbollah bombing the houses of the communities in the north. They are right at the fence, right at the fence of the border. The terrain is very different in a sense that these are hills and valleys and a lot of trees. And the feeling of lack of security is very, very strong because the enemy can hide everywhere and enter to the communities very quickly. So the first thing that happened to us in October 7th is that we understood that we are at great risk. We understood that Hezbollah's plan was executed by Hamas, and no one can promise us that it is not going to be executed by Hezbollah within the next few hours. The next day, Hezbollah joined the war. And since October 8th, there is war up north. It's not at the same scale. There was no invasion. It is different. It's a low-scale war. But in any terms, this is war. What do I mean? Every day, we have strikes of Hezbollah against these communities and military positions and military assets up north. Whether it's anti-tank missiles that are being launched every day, and this is a tactical weapon. You hear anti-tank, but they are not launched only against tanks. Most of these missiles were launched against homes, against people, against buildings, against infrastructures, and we don't have an alert when they are launched, and Iron Dome cannot intercept them because that's direct shooting, it's not a ballistic missile. So Hezbollah took a tactical weapon and made it has strategic meaning. They are using Burkan missiles, which are the upgrading of a barrel bomb to a rocket, to short ranges, but extremely heavy, almost half a ton. And a few more types of heavy rockets. They are using drones and UAVs, which are very accurate as well, to attack in the north. And every day we have an average of, 8, 5, 12, 2. It started from 2 attacks a day and it escalated very, very quickly to much more than that. And I think that the past 2 days were kind of crazy. I think every day we had like 10 attacks. Now, in each attack, it's more than one missile. In each attack, you have few. I don't know how many, but in each attack, you have few. Most of the attacks were carried out against these communities which are at the border, 0 to 5 kilometers. And there were few attacks which were to greater ranges of 10, even 15 kilometers from the border. It doesn't sound much, but in Israeli terms, it means that 300,000 Israelis are living under the threat, the very existential threat of Hezbollah, and 60,000 people that are living next to the border were evacuated right at the beginning of the war because nobody could promise us that Hezbollah will not invade the same way of Hamas. And today, even though the IDF is present up north and it is initiating attacks against Hezbollah as well, and it is preventing Hezbollah attacks as much as possible, finding the squads that are about to launch and hitting them, IDF failed to prevent completely this shooting that I've mentioned. And the people of these villages are saying, we demand security. We cannot go back to our homes while there is a constant fire. Now, I must tell you, I live 9 kilometers from the border. I hear the sounds of war. I don't live in a peaceful, nice town anymore. Okay, we hear the artillery, we hear the hits of these Burkans, we hear, the jets and everything that is going on in the sky. When I hear a drone above my head throughout the night, I never know whether it's an Air Force drone or Hezbollah drone. I'm not calm anymore. I sleep in a different way than I used to. We are much more alert. We are much more tense. And our life completely changed since October 7th. It's not the same feeling.
Speak to me really quick about the feelings. You mentioned how you're sleeping, and as you mentioned, we have about the 60,000 or so people from the borderline communities have been evacuated to hotels, to other solutions across the country, but they're still there. The north is still evacuated, and we were talking about almost 3-4 months, like we're not even able to count anymore. And from what I'm hearing, at least, people are saying, well, I can't go back if Hezbollah stays there. It needs to be removed in order for me to come back securely. And the discussion in the international community now, at least, in the big media voices, are about Hezbollah retreat, north of the Litani. I mean, is that even realistic? Is that even plausible? Do the people of the north, the ones who actually know how is it to deal with Hezbollah, believe that that's even a possibility? Or are they demanding war, essentially? Or is that an inevitable reality?
I can't say they demand war. I would say
Or
that there are
demand,
different opinions.
clear, demand, maybe not war.
They demand
Demand
security.
militarily. Okay.
Yeah, they demand security. Look, I feel that there are, we are discussing two main options. Whether it's a war that will eliminate the military threat of Hezbollah, but would mean a great damage to both sides, because Hezbollah is hiding its munitions inside the populated areas of Lebanon, in Beirut, in the Bekaa, and in South Lebanon, inside the homes, inside the towns. We published tons of information about that in Alma. Everything you saw in Gaza of the rifles in the teddy bear and under the bed, you're going to see the same thing in the Shiite towns of Lebanon. And that's why the damage is going to be great for both sides. I feel like Israel is trying to avoid that as much as possible. And we hear a lot of suggestions by international community, as you said, about pushing Hezbollah north to the Litani River. This agreement was already made almost 18 years ago. Okay, there was a United Nations Security Council resolution that ended the previous war between Israel and Hezbollah, saying that the area between the blue line, the border, and the Litani River, which is about 25 kilometers length, should be empty of any illegal military presence. Only Lebanese army or the UN can be armed in this area. It never happened. From day one, Hezbollah didn't intend to do that, to follow this decision. And what happened in the past almost 18 years is that Hezbollah became much stronger and much more equipped and much more entrenched military entrenched in these towns and villages, in this area that it is not supposed to be in from the first place. So that's why Israelis have very little faith in a diplomatic agreement. And we are saying very clearly, if you want to get a diplomatic agreement, you need to have an effective enforcement mechanism that will make sure that Hezbollah is not entrenched in these towns. What the challenge? The challenge is that Hezbollah military operatives, at least 60% of those who were killed, for example, in the current war, live and buried in South Lebanon. It's their homes. They are not going to withdraw. In their point of view, they are protecting their homes. They are not going to withdraw. So first, we should change the wording. We don't demand the withdrawal of Hezbollah because Hezbollah is not an external militia that occupied South Lebanon. Okay, it's a local militia. It has an external ideology, but it's a local militia. And once we understand that we cannot demand them to withdraw. It's not about the military operatives. It's about their equipment. We need to make sure that they lose any military capability. We need to make sure that there are no, the warehouses of the rockets, the headquarters, the observation posts, the missiles, the rifles, all these military equipment don't exist in South Lebanon. Now you understand that this takes time. And in order for this to happen, you need an effective mechanism to enforce that. And Lebanese army is not the answer because Lebanese army don't intend to do that. It's not interested in creating any conflict with Hezbollah. The UN is not the answer. It had never done that. It's not going to start now. And that's why we don't trust the diplomatic agreement. By the way, what's the deadline? We had 17 years and it didn't happen. So are we going to wait 17 more years? Are we going to enable Hezbollah to carry out the next massacre, waiting for it to disarm or to withdraw or to push back or all these nice words? This is a problem. So, and I think that after seeing the statement of our defense minister this week, I think that what Israel is trying to do is trying to create a third option. I'm not sure it will succeed, but I think that this is what Israel is trying to do. And Israel is trying to create a third option, which is a military option, okay? To attack Hezbollah military assets in Lebanon, but probably not completely eliminate it, to create damage, and then after creating sufficient damage, below the scale of a full-scale war, get into some kind of a better agreement. I think this is what, maximizing the military achievements before a ceasefire is imposed. Will this succeed? I don't know. I'm not sure. Is this going to be sufficient for 60,000 people that have seen what happened to their brothers and sisters in the south and strongly believe that Hezbollah is willing to do the same things exactly in the north, in everything, including everything, all the atrocities, including the sexual abusement, including the mutilation of bodies, and including the trapping of civilians to become human shields. Everything can happen the same way by Hezbollah. They are not less cruel, they are just more experienced in battlefield because they fought in the civil war in Syria. They were killing Sunni Muslims in Syria in the past decade, and now they are perfectly willing to kill Israelis, whether they are Muslims or Christians or Jews or whatever. It just doesn't matter, or Druze, okay? It just doesn't matter. We cannot afford that.
Especially after working together for so long, I was like analyzing the situation and what happened in Gaza and trying to imagine the scenario in Lebanon with the Lebanese border. And I would discuss with people, and I would always say that the main difference that I would see, that if God forbid that would have happened in the north, the main difference would be that it would not be going into a community, kidnap and go back. That community would have a Lebanese and Hezbollah flag on top of it, and it will be
no Lebanese, Hezbollah and Iranian flag.
Hezbollah and Iranian, the three together, like we see in Marud al-Ras and other areas. But communities like Hanita, like Shtula, something a community like that would not be it would be completely taken over territorially, and it would be a completely different ballgame and recapturing those kind of territories. It's not the same
It will
as
take longer to win against Hezbollah and to gain back the control in these places. In the south as well, they actually occupied the communities, but IDF succeeded in pushing them back. It took 3 days. It may take longer here. Because of the terrain, by the way. The terrain is different, remember.
And you mentioned, trying to reach military achievements before a ceasefire is imposed. Do you think that a ceasefire, or let's just say, like in a hypothetical scenario, the war ends tomorrow in Gaza? Does that mean that the clashes in the north end as well?
I believe, and I've seen this in the previous ceasefire, that Hezbollah will strive to cease its fire in the north officially, and then, in its own time, after residents will come back, or during residents are coming back, launch an anti-tank missile here and there, and actually creating in northern Israel exactly the situation that we experienced in the south during the past 18 years, that the children in southern Israel grew up under the sounds of the sirens, and eventually it ended up with the tragedy that we've seen. And I think that Hezbollah would want to do the same here, because I believe, and we have said that many times before the war started, that Hezbollah is interested in escalation, it is interested in war. It doesn't care if Lebanon will be destroyed, because what it had learned from the war in 2006 is that when Lebanon is destroyed, a decade afterwards, or 2 decades afterwards, Hezbollah is becoming much stronger, and the other players in Lebanon are becoming much weaker. So it's an excellent deal. They are Hezbollah is trying to drag Israel into war, to make Israel initiate the full-scale war that was not initiated yet, putting Israel in an unbearable situation. Everybody understands that these are red lines of Israel that were crossed, because we cannot live in these areas anymore, and Israel will have to do something. And if eventually it will deteriorate to a full-scale war, not because of Hamas, but because of Lebanese-Israeli border, it will enable Hezbollah to say, we are not the aggressors, we are the protectors of Lebanon. It will enable Hezbollah to continue to build its image the way it wants to build its image. And I think this is why Hezbollah didn't join in on October 7th, because it didn't want to be part of a campaign only for the sake of the Palestinians. It wants to be part of a campaign which is for the sake of Lebanon. So if tomorrow there is a ceasefire in Gaza, I believe that Nasrallah will announce, yeah, I'm willing for a ceasefire. No problem. It's Israel that is not willing for a ceasefire. And as I've said, our defense minister already said that we are not going for a ceasefire up north, because a ceasefire is not a solution to our security. A ceasefire will preserve the military capabilities of Hezbollah, and it will be in the hands of Nasrallah to decide when to attack us and in what ways.
And we as a regional organization, a regional peace organization, we're looking always at regional cooperation, at alliances between our young leaders from the Israeli community, Palestinian, and the rest of the region, and we're looking for these connections to overcome the challenges of these radical voices that exist in our region. In this scenario, in the north, what is the role of the region? Is there a role of the region to be played? Who should intervene and how?
Look, I believe that with all the tragedy that we experienced here in Gaza and in Israel, we are facing also an opportunity. And we should make sure that we take this opportunity. So first I must start from what not to do. If we will continue to give legitimacy to Hamas, this opportunity is going to be missed. when the chairman of the Palestinian Authority strives to establish a government, that Hamas will be a member of this government, it is given legitimacy to a war criminal organization that carried out worst crimes, people talk about a genocide. This was a genocide, October 7th. Only when you go to these communities and you see what happened there, you understand. The idea was to carry out a genocide against Israelis. If we want to create a coalition of states that want to live together in the Middle East, and I believe the state of Israel doesn't want war. Israelis believe in peace. Israelis cherish life. We all send our kids to the army. We want them to come back safe. The army is Israel Defense Forces. We failed in defense, but that's our mission, to defend ourselves. We don't have any interest to do anything else. And I think that there is a lot of room to collaborate, to create a new generation. Gaza is an amazing opportunity to build new schools that will educate the Gazians to something else, to believe in science, to believe in progress, to believe in prosperity, to believe in life and not in death, not in martyrdom, to believe in their own future. Gaza is a small place. It's not different from Dubai. You can make Dubai in Gaza. There are beautiful beaches in Gaza, but the people of Gaza need to believe in life. And the opportunity is not in the hands of the Israelis, because we cannot build schools in Gaza. It's ridiculous, yes? Israelis cannot educate Gazians. But our other Arabs can work with the Gazians to build a new future for Gaza. And I'm especially focusing on the education, because money is not enough to solve the problem. And agreements are not enough to solve the problem, and military operations are not enough to solve the problem. The only thing that will be enough to solve the problem is to change the way we raise our kids. And again, I was in Dubai, I saw the model. The regime, the government of Dubai, it's not a democracy. It's a different way of handling a country, and it works. It works. And I think that we can adopt the model, again, especially in Gaza, because of the tragedy and what happened in Gaza.
And looking more into the region, there's one particular country that, it's been in the news before the war, certainly, and now resurfacing, potential deal with Saudi Arabia. How much do you believe that was also a part of the reason, let's just say, there's so many speculations that it is part of this strategic reasoning behind the attack on the 7th? And are we still on the march towards a deal with the Saudis? And how helpful would that be to ending this war, improving the situation here? What is the Saudi role?
I'll say two things. First, I myself was surprised by the announcement of MBS that it is going to normalization with Israel. I was surprised. I believe that the Iranians planned this campaign that we are now experiencing, but the trigger to start it, and maybe even to start it earlier than planned, was the normalization process between Israel and Saudi Arabia. I strongly believe that this was the reason for the date. And in this, you can already understand that I believe that Iran and Hezbollah knew about the plan, and maybe they disappointed Hamas because they didn't plan to join in from the first place. And Hamas thought that they will join in, but they never planned to do that. As I've said, they joined in, but not the way Hamas expected. I believe, again, I think that normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia can bring a lot of prosperity and can create amazing influence on the region. I have a lot of hope in that, but I understand the restraints. I understand the limitations of MBS, talking about this two-state solution. On the other hand, Israel is now, and I think we deeply changed. Israel is deeply changed from what happened. Hamas didn't change. Hezbollah didn't change. Israel is deeply changed. We are in trauma. We are not even in post-trauma. We are in trauma of what happened. And we feel, as I've said, we feel the danger under the skin. So to expect us now to establish a Palestinian state, while nobody promised us that Hamas is not going to be elected and the controller of the state. And we know that polls show that there is massive support in West Bank to Hamas. It's not an option now. It may be an option in the future. But for now, as I've said, we need to change the education. We need to make sure that we are building the two-state solution on a very solid base. And the solid base is the willingness of both sides to live together. And this doesn't exist now. So Israelis are willing to live together, but they are not willing to have a two-state solution at this moment because they don't trust Palestinians not to follow Hamas. I'm saying that, it is what it is. It's very sad to say that, but it is what it is. And in order to create a reality that Israelis will have the trust again, I think, again, this is the mission of all Arab states around us that already signed peace agreements with Israel to build, as you said, to build these bridges that will bring back the trust of Israelis, because Israelis today don't trust Palestinians not to follow Hamas again.
Yeah, sadly, the issue of trust is certainly, I think, our biggest obstacle. I mean, we've seen it, even with the Arab citizens of Israel. Like, immediately the question, 2 days after the 7th, the question was whether or not we're having second Guardians of the Wall, which, emphasizes
Definitely.
how thin the trust, even inside Israel, 75 years later, after we're living together, there is still this trust. And, my personal hope is that we start from our community, make the trust here so strong that can be conveyed towards.
I don't know what you experience, maybe because I live in an area, that this area is unique. I must tell you that I think that many of the bridges were already built in the current war between Jews and Arabs in Israel. I feel winds of change here, and in this respect, I became much more optimistic. And the fact that Arabs of Israel that are living in Israel, again, I don't know if they condemn Hamas, yes, no, near. The bottom line is that we didn't experience Guardian of the Wall again. It didn't happen. Even though Iran tried to make it happen, it didn't happen. There is a big question mark now before Ramadan. What will happen in the next Ramadan? And I think the next Ramadan, again, it's a risk, but it's an opportunity. If things will be quiet and Muslims will be capable of prayer in Temple Mount without riots, and there will, things will go quietly, as it used to do in many years, by the way, on Temple Mount, and not like what happened in the Guardian of the Wall, I believe that it will contribute to the building of more bridges over here between Jews and Arabs inside Israel. And I think, as I've said, many of them were already built because when Arabs, and I speak with my neighbors here, when Arabs saw what was happening in the southern part of Israel, they said, we don't want to be part of that. This is not for the Palestinian cause. This is something else. And I want to remind you that Muslim Bedouins were murdered brutally by Hamas, and they were taken hostages as well. We still had Bedouin hostages in Gaza.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's the place where we can turn this into an opportunity, especially seeing that, Arab doctors were standing, day and night, nurses, everybody was in a mutual trauma also at the beginning of this war. And hopefully this will be the place where all of us, say that enough. We can't go back to that reality. This cannot be our future. I want to take one more zoom out after we zoomed out to the regional element and look at, obviously the elections in the United States. It's a must-ask question at this time,
My God.
especially the sensitivity of the North. Biden's earlier statement of the war, bringing the U.S. carrier, but now we have elections on the horizon.
He took it back,
Questions.
don't worry, it's not here
Yep, and
anymore. The US
yep, and he
carrier.
took it back. Yep, and he took it back, and he has elections on the horizon. Trump is trying to go back to being president, and the question is, how will that affect the North in particular? In Israel in
It is
general, but
already
obviously
affecting
the
the North.
North.
I think it is already affecting the North. I think that Biden administration wants to see a ceasefire. And it was working very hard to achieve a ceasefire. And I think Israeli government understood that it has no other choice but to go with what the administration wants. But what happened is that Hezbollah spoiled the party. And Hezbollah announced that it's not interested in a ceasefire. And it is not willing to have any arrangement until the war in Gaza is over. And now what happened is that our defense minister, started to speak in Arabic. And he said, okay, fine, you don't want a ceasefire? There is no ceasefire, let's fight below the scale of a full-scale war. But we are going to solve the problem up north. If not with a ceasefire, and again, a ceasefire is not the goal. It's the goal for the Americans, but for the Israelis, it's the security arrangement around it. Okay? And Gallant said, if we are not going to have a sufficient security arrangement around this ceasefire. Okay? So we will gain them in a different way. It's not good news. I don't have good news about what's happening. Okay, I wish I could wake up one morning and say, okay, the birds are singing, the flowers are blooming, it's springtime, and there is peace here, and I can just go to eat the hummus in Beirut and take you with me. I wish I could do that, but the reality is different. And Hezbollah educated, again, I'm going back to education all the time, educated his own people to cherish death. It educated his own people that Israel is interested in taking over Lebanon, which we are not, okay? My grandmother was born in Lebanon, but I only wish to go there as a tourist. I don't wish to go back and live there, or I don't know what. I'm sorry, that's the reality. We don't have a good neighbor on the other side of the border. And I am praying every day that I will finally see the mother with the hijab, the Shiite mother wearing the black hijab, taking the rockets out of her home and saying to Nasrallah, take these rockets, I don't want them in my home anymore. I want peace. And instead of that, I see videos of mothers saying, we are willing to sacrifice our children to become shaheeds against the Zionist entity.
And coming elections, what would change, or let's just say if Biden wins, do you think that will change his view on the North? And what happens if Trump wins? Because there's a lot of speculation of Trump's isolationism.
I think this is important. Impossible to anticipate what will happen if Trump wins. You may see
Many
more
have
sanctions.
tried.
Yeah, you may see more sanctions and working with restrictions on the money flow, but I'm not sure you will see something more than that. I'm not sure. I'm not saying it will not happen. I'm saying we don't know. Okay, with the Biden administration, I believe that they will try to prevent escalation as much as possible. But again, everybody should bear in mind, Israel is changed. I'm saying that as a mother. I am not willing anymore to live under the threat of a massacre. I'm not going to accept that. And this is something that Israel will have to work with the Americans to find the way. I don't know. Look, the Israeli government announced just this week that it is extending the time of evacuation, and it is financing the evacuation of these people until July. The timeline of the Americans and the timeline of the Israelis is not the same timeline. Okay, the Americans would love to wait until after elections and then to try to solve the problem. Just to wait. And Israelis cannot wait because people are not living in their homes. And families are falling apart and communities are falling apart. And a solution must be found. And Hezbollah knows that. And that's why it is playing like that. For Hezbollah, that's the most comfortable situation. We evacuated the north. They continue to bomb. What's the problem? So they pay a small price of a few hundred of military operatives that are getting killed, and a small price of a few tens of thousands Lebanese that are also evacuated from their homes. I don't think Hezbollah cares about that. If Hezbollah truly cared about the Lebanese, it wouldn't hide its munition inside their homes.
Or it would pursue a ceasefire when the opportunity arose, basically, also.
Or, just pursue peace. Again, I don't think a ceasefire is a solution anymore. A peace is a solution. Hezbollah disarmament is a solution. Recognizing the very existence of the state of Israel. This is what the peace agreement with all other Arabs was based upon. The fact that all these states, Jordan, Egypt, UAE, I don't know why am I forgetting,
Morocco,
all of these,
Bahrain,
Morocco, accepted the fact that, okay, there is an Israeli state here. We like it, we don't like it, doesn't matter. It's here, it exists. What do we do with that? It's not the case with Lebanon.
And now, I would love to hear, if there anything else that you would like to say to our audience, any message that you have for our listeners out there, maybe some positivity after all these things that you told us.
I think I think the relationship between Sarah and Abraham, or Sarah and Ibrahim, I don't know how do you spell Sarah in the Quran, but
Sarah.
But I think this relationship between us, long years relationship, and we disagree upon many things. But it taught, first I learned a lot, and it taught me that it is possible. We can find a way. We can find a way to live together. It's not a fantasy. That's one thing. And second, I want to send a message to the audience here. Israelis see the amount of casualties in Gaza. We are not blind to that. The difference is that we see Hamas as responsible to this suffering. And we believe that as long as Hamas is not defeated, the suffering of the Gazians and the suffering of the Israelis will deliberately continue. And deliberately means that Hamas wants to see his own people getting killed. This is the ideology. It's the culture of death. That's why they build an underground state, I can say, below Gaza, because they knew that Gaza will be destroyed if they will massacre Israelis. This is why they didn't enable their own citizens to hide in this underground Gaza, which is safe from the Israeli bombings. You see this yourself, it's safe. Most of the tunnels were not destroyed by the Israeli bombing. They were destroyed only by the ground raids and invasion. They knew that in Hamas. They wanted to get their own people killed, suffering, hungry. That's why they are taking the humanitarian aid, preventing it from the people. What we are doing now, I know that many people are getting killed. We are all aware of that. But Hamas should be held accountable for that. And as long as Hamas is not held accountable for that, more people will get killed, Israelis and Palestinians alike. And that's why we cannot accept the existence of Hamas, either in Gaza, neither in West Bank, because they don't cherish life. None of us lives. Doesn't matter whether we are Jews, Arabs, Muslims, whatever.
And, hopefully this catastrophe that has fallen on us, like you say, would bring opportunity instead for something new to flourish. Sometimes the worst things can, push us to search for something better, and hopefully that would be the case. And in terms of the North, we, from here, from Ropes, we hope that you remain safe, your family, the people that are evacuated can come back and return to their homes safely, and that maybe one day, hopefully sooner rather than later, things will be different in the north, and we can just, cross the border, go to a visit, and just spend an afternoon together as guests in Beirut, and just eat on the Mediterranean Sea or something, because that's the future we would aspire for, where we just live together. It's like it's not impossible.
We talked about it in the past that our grandmothers experienced the war between two people. And we, the grandchildren here, are building a new future. I think that with regard to the North, I only hope that our grandchildren will be able to build the bridges with the people of Beirut and the people of South Lebanon.
Hopefully sooner than that, but yeah, it's definitely challenging task ahead. And again, thank you so much, Sarit, for your time, for your analysis, for your perspective on the North. Everybody is trying to understand what's happening there, so your insight and input was definitely crucial to that. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode of ROPESCAST. Our podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, and all quality podcast platforms. We are very grateful to all our listeners from the Middle East, Europe, the United States, and other parts of the world. You can support our work by small donation. More details on our website, ropes.org. Please follow ropes.org on social networks to find out more about our work with emerging leaders of the Middle East. I'm Ibrahim Abu Ahmad. Shalom and salam.